Hey, it's Pastor Pete here. Welcome to this, my sixth commentary video, as I call them, where I take someone else's video conversation and I take snips from it that I think are important, and I comment in between the snips, in between the clips that I select. And so today I have one that has a warning tone to it. I'll get to more on that in a moment. I feel a need this time to give some broader background before I focus in on this video. I firmly believe, in fact I know, I don't question this, that there's always cultural shifts going on in society and in the church itself. And particularly the ones in society affect the culture of the church, the shape that it takes, the things that it does. Both of those were mentioned by people like Tim Keller and J.K. Smith, and I have clips on that in earlier commentary videos I made. And in fact, they say we like to believe in the church that we're shaped by the church's teaching and by the Bible, but they both strongly imply, I'll say, that the broader culture actually shapes us more than we realize, and it's time to wake up to that. And there are others who say that the broader cultural patterns are distracting us, or the church, from its main purpose. That goes back to Douglas Murray when he was talking with N.T. Wright on Unbelievable, another commentary I did. Historians like Tom Holland and philosophers like Charles Taylor, I'm less certain about whether this applies to Charles Taylor or not, but I have this impression, so I'll just share it as a truth. Both of those point out the Christianity-derived foundational beliefs that reside in what we today call secular culture. So there's this residue, there's this remnant of Christianity. It's kind of, for Tom Holland, one of the key realizations as he was trying to write a history from the Greek times on, and came to see the crucifixion as kind of a glue, a backbone to many things that developed. That's for you to read on your own. So my own observation is, a theory you could say, that some of these principles or beliefs are taking on a life of their own, maybe even becoming a religion. And these spin-off religions sound like Christianity, but when you examine them, they have jettisoned the moorings in the core of Christianity. And when I say the core of Christianity, what I mean, and I'm trying to be creative in my language here without being cliche, but the core of Christianity is Jesus' establishing of a whole new way of being and relating in this world, what's called the kingdom of God, or the ways of the kingdom of God. That's a very important part of my own theology. So a couple of those principles or tenets or teachings that come out of Christianity and now are embedded in our culture, just a couple of them, there are more, are the notion that we should love and take care of those who society rejects and who society disempowers. In Old Testament imagery and even in the New Testament, this was widows and orphans. In a day before insurance, the community was commanded to take care of such people. Also the disabled and things like that, but mostly summarized as widows and orphans. That's one. Take care of those who are underprivileged. A second one is that everyone is equal. This one seems to be getting lost in the eyes of God. All people are created in the image of God to image God. And so this is also a very important core concept in Christianity that spins from the core itself that I just named. Another one is that greater power means greater responsibility. You find that in Spider-Man 1 verse 3. But it's actually also a Bible concept. And so some of the guidelines for kings, or when kings in the Bible got in trouble, it generally meant that they had misused their greater responsibility, their power. A fourth one is that wisdom is gained very often through suffering. If you get it any other way, that's a gift. But suffering brings wisdom. It brings new insight. Struggle brings insight. And that's a biblical teaching. The last one I'll mention is that the one who gives us access to eternal relationship with the Creator was also the ultimate victim. Christianity is very different in that, in having their big hero be a victim. And that truth for 2,000 years has been working its way into the cultural views of things, along with the first one that I mentioned. And so, as far as I understand, I am no expert in this, our view of victims has slowly over time changed. Whereas in almost all cultures before, if you would claim to be a victim, many people would say, so? Only the king had some responsibility to protect victims in that way, and maybe by extension some of his other subjects. And so this victim being a hero is unlike anything else. And so now in our culture, in the last while, our view of victims has changed, and a lot of that is very, very healthy. Victims are more likely to be taken seriously today than at any other time, and I think that's important that we do that. So those things, I made that longer than I intended to, are part of my own spirituality and my belief system that I call Christianity. There's a possibility that I'm starting to see that each of these might well be getting launched into new ideologies, and so overemphasized or twisted. And if that happens, apart from the core of Christianity that I mentioned at the top, then there will be problems. They're actually not sustainable from a Christian point of view. Now, I might have to explain that separately, otherwise this video will be too long, but I'll just leave it at that statement for now. I'm exploring all these ideas. I'm trying to learn and understand from both the perspective of a progressive person and a what would be called a more conservative person. I know this video is going to make me sound more conservative than I like to sound, or give that impression. So I feel a need to say unflinchingly that great damages have been done by way of racism, some of it even my own, and colonization, the colonial view of conquering the world. And yes, some of those evils were, in the minds of those who perpetrated them, rooted in Christianity. Again, more to say, not this time. And so, because of the Christian messages, Christians ought, in my view, to be at the forefront of following Jesus' way of reconciling the world to the people in the world to each other, and the people to the world, to the cosmos, and the people to God. And I am certain that we have not done well at that, and that we have a lot to learn. So now to the video that I'm going to comment on. The source video is from 2020. I will put a link in the notes. In the video, a leader of the Southern Baptist Convention has a conversation with James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. And this video begins, they've done a series of these, this is just one of them. He begins by reading off a denominational resolution where some respect is shown to the value of critical race theory. That's all I think I need to say. I share these clips to feed reflection and thought and conversation. This one, the first one, helps me see the possible changes and identify the possible dangers in the culture, and then the culture of the church. I do not agree with everything that is said. I find some of it alarmist and hyperbolic. They kind of get each other excited and start saying things that don't seem so thoughtful. And in this first clip, James Lindsay is describing the terms that are going to be used, and he's describing them from his perspective. It will be interesting for me to look up and try and find out if they're defined in other ways as well. But here they are as he defines them.
Let's take a look at the word critical here. What does the word critical mean? The word critical means, in this context, looking at in extreme closeness, analyzing particularly the use of language, history, etc., in order to make problems related specifically to oppression more visible so that people will want to enact a revolution to overturn the power dynamics that are alleged to be a part of it. That's critical. Critical means, in a sense, complaining about in a specific way to affect a radical political agenda, to make problems visible that you wouldn't otherwise see. Now, obviously, there can be benefit to making problems visible, but it is a method that is specifically designed to focus on problems and only on problems. Then there's the theory side, critical race theory. This theory is not the word theory that you might hear from scientists. It's not the word theory that you might hear from, a lay person. I was like, oh, I have a theory about... This is a specific meaning of the term theory in the sense of sociology or social philosophy would be a better way to put it, which is supposed to be some kind of an explanatory structure. And in this case, critical race theory is directly derived from critical legal theory, which does the same thing with law and tries to pick apart where the law has been insufficient, make problems visible in order to effect a political change. And B, postmodern theory. And postmodern theory is this idea, among many other things, that knowledge is produced within various communities, unique to that community, that cannot then be evaluated from outside of that community. So in the case of critical race theory, the way that gets applied is that, say, a person of whatever race, people of whatever race I should say, not a person of, roughly have the same experiences in life of oppression based on their racial status, or of dominance if that race happens to be one that's considered dominant, white, and they roughly have the same experiences in life, so they roughly should have the same view of oppression, and that gives them special insight that is not available to anybody else. And so you have to defer to that as though it is true. You can't possibly question that, or doubt that, or demand a different form or more rigor or another layer or level of analysis, because that would be to foist another culture's process of legitimizing ideas upon a racial culture that doesn't necessarily embrace that. So the claim would be that that group, that identity group, has knowledge that can't be questioned from outside of that group. So you have no option other than to agree with it.
So if his description is at all accurate, we can already see how the original idea of being an oppressed person who the non-oppressed have a responsibility toward starts moving towards a resentment of those who are experienced in life as oppressive or as oppressors, and how it starts to take steps towards disempowering those people and claiming a power that they do not have. So the underpowered start claiming a new kind of power. That's significant. The next clip contains a description of what intersectionality is, and for me, this particular video was a learning time for me in terms of some of this terminology, so I left this clip in. Again, it's explained from their particular perspective, but as he talks, this flipping of the power dynamic starts to become clearer.
The intersectional framework is one where you start subdividing identity groups to try to claim, so you as a human being, as an individual, are not to be viewed as an individual with your own agency. You're to be viewed as an individual who is a combination of whichever identity groups you're in, and each of those has its own essential experience of oppression particularly, that gives you the lived experience, as they call it, that you have, that confers knowledge upon you, and then that is intimately related to the power dynamics, not just as they happen to be in society now, but as they are theorized to be based on history, based on the hypothesis that a power dynamic once in place always works to justify and maintain itself and really can't be corrected. That idea was from Audre Lorde, was articulated as the master's tools cannot or will not dismantle the master's house. So it's a heuristic, or as its originator, its progenitor, Kimberly Crenshaw, put, a practice of trying to winnow out more and more specific special interests within a population based on their identity markers, and to claim that they have unique experiences that give them unique insight into the world that everybody else can't possibly criticize and have to listen to and accept by fiat.
I think it's important at this stage to unpack a little bit what the master's tools are. Why don't you?
So some of the master's tools in this case would be reason, logic, science, evidence, exegesis.
Let that sink in for a second.
The argument from within critical race theory is that the people who invented those methods of legitimizing knowledge, who happen to be white, Western males, straight, and so what have you, built the method of legitimizing knowledge that we call science, reason, logic, exegesis, whatever happens to be, specifically for the purpose of understanding knowledge the way they want to understand knowledge, so that their power is maintained, so that they can exclude what they call other ways of knowing, the knowledges, plural, of other cultures that within those cultures are equally true.
Right.
And they say that there's no external objective location to which you could retreat or back up and look and say, okay.
No God's eye view.
No God's eye view from nowhere is what they actually sometimes call that. It's the God's eye view from nowhere is what they refer to as the objective stance. And they say that such a thing's not possible. There's only the possibility of understanding a thing from within your cultural milieu.
Right.
And your cultural milieu has its methods of making knowledge claims, and you can't evaluate one from another. So there's no way to say my reading, for this context, my reading of Scripture is more authoritative than yours. My reading of history is more authoritative than yours. It's not possible to make such claims, because somebody else making it from another culture might say, well, I see it differently. And because you don't understand the oppressions and the ways that we've been excluded from the conversation over however many hundreds of years of history, it's not possible for you to even understand what we're talking about. So you just have to accept by fiat what we're saying. So
yeah, it's even.
So if I understand this right, this is where the unmooring from any sense of objective truth, this unmooring is a part of becoming a postmodern society, where it brings us. We get these competing truth claims from within an individual's or a collective's experience that has no longer has an outside reference or referee or referent. There's nothing beyond the truth of one's own experience, and who one is the sum of one's identity communities. And so this creates what this theory, when it starts unfolding, this creates a need, if you're going to have some respectability, to identify with as many oppressed categories as possible, and to identify others as non-oppressed or oppressors, so that you can feel the power, the empowerment of this. As I'm talking, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking it through, and I'm not done yet at all. So the next clip is a further explanation of how a person's place in their own story is theorized to give a unique insight that no one else can access. No one else has had your particular experience, particularly if it's an oppressive experience. And that gives you something, that gives you a trump card in some ways.
To actually derive of the truth, you must go through the different standpoint epistemologies because they might have the real truth as opposed to an objective truth.
Right, so let me talk about standpoint epistemology, giving it kind of an analogy so people can understand it, because it's a really counterintuitive idea for a lot of people. So standpoint epistemology, to speak kind of philosophically and broadly without the analogy, is this idea that how you are situated in society, meaning how you are situated as an identity, and how that identity is related to power in society, as written by theory in terms of how power works, dictates what you can and cannot know. A good way to understand standpoint epistemology is to think of it kind of like color blindness that's caused by having a various identity group privilege. Okay? So if the idea is that if you are in the dominant group, you live in a world from the perspective of the dominant, in a dominant world, so you have one perspective, the dominant perspective. If you are a marginalized group, you have the marginalized perspective while living in the dominant world, so you also have the dominant perspective as well as the marginalized perspective, suggesting you have information, which is the experience of oppression, in this system that other people don't have. This has a degree of sense to it. There is something to this, and it behooves us to listen to things that have been marginalized and excluded. But listening is not the same as believing. Hear out, investigate, that's a different thing from listen and believe. Shut up, listen and believe is even further down that path. So you can think of it like color blindness. If you happen to be the intersection of all the dominant things, the most dominant things, white, straight, male, Western, able-bodied, thin, fit, whatever they happen to be, then it's like you can only see in grayscale. You see the world, everything's in the colors that you live in. You have only grayscale vision. Everything's in black and white. But then say that you're a woman instead. That's like being able to pick up red.
Right.
So now you can see more of the world, and we can look at this building, we can say, oh, those bricks are very organized and well, nice and blah, blah, blah. But if we had a person who can see red, you say, oh, it's red brick. But we couldn't possibly know that without somebody to tell us. How do we know it's not blue or green, or what do those words even mean if we actually can only see in grayscale? Now suppose it's a black woman. An intersected identity. This is intersectionality and how it uses standpoint epistemology to justify why people of marginalized identities have a special status that have to be listened to and believed. Now it's like adding in green, so the person can see red and green. Add in like disability status or a sexual minority. Now they can see in shades of blue as well. You can add in, we're going to start running out of colors, but you can just continue to add more dimensions. Like they can see in ultraviolet, they can see in infrared too. You can add more and more layers of depth that you get the more intersected identities you have. And standpoint epistemology is the idea that it is possible that the people who have more experiences of marginalization therefore have more access to see the world and understand the world and access truth that people who live with dominance simply cannot possibly understand. And the belief is such that this is so pernicious and so total, in the same sense that the same total as you see in total depravity, totalizing, over everything, infecting every part of your being. Privilege infects every part of your being, that you can't possibly understand the experience of somebody who can see in a different color than you can, just as if you were truly colorblind and have no idea. Like they say that there's some people who are so-called tetrachromats who can detect a fourth basic color. Very few, very, very rare. They're all women for various biological reasons. And it's like that. They have the ability to see a richness of color that nobody else has. And that's what standpoint epistemology connects to oppression. That's what intersectionality uses to claim that the oppressed person has knowledge that you cannot possibly understand, and you just have to believe pretty much literally on faith, on their testimony. That some people's testimony, because of who they are and their identity, is superior to that of other people. And the only thing more privileged people can do is listen. They can't understand. They actually can't even fully empathize because they're outside of it. And you have to be able to meet somebody to empathize.
And they can't adjudicate between competing testimonies.
Exactly.
In case you hadn't caught yet, it is said at some point in the videos, but James and Peter are not actively Christian in any way. I think they seem to have some childhood experience with it, but they are not actively Christian. And in fact, later we'll find out that they were part of the new atheist, or the angry atheist, as they called it, movement. And so they use this term standpoint epistemology, from that your own story that you live out of is the only thing is yours, and others can't understand it except for those who have a story that is common to yours, and particularly a story of oppression. I found it interesting that depravity, as a Reformed Christian, is brought into this, and I think in the end, when I finish thinking this through, depravity is going to be a very significant thing, that these ideologies redefine depravity and want to deny that we all have depravity affecting us. None of us is free of it. And that's a theological understanding that I don't hear in these ideologies. So it comes down to only the experience of oppression that you have had, and that gives you something superior. Maybe it's a superior knowledge. Suffering and oppression, navigated well, and not many can navigate them well, does in fact, I believe, and I know, give you insights you could get no other way. I have had many times when I have said to God, I'd like to have it a little easier now, so that I don't care what insights I'm going to miss out on, but I'd like to have it easier now. And by His grace, He seems to be granting that to me at this time. I'll move to the next clip without introduction.
So if you look at this from the perspective of this is a faith that states that it has believed in objective truth, has objective standards, has a confessional process, has an exegetical method that it's been committed to for years, then all of the sudden, with a crisis being reported that we must deal with these things now, and this is brought in as an analytical tool in terms of understanding how we need to deal with these things. Where else would you see that happen? And what would you say? What would you say? Okay, go ahead, Pete.
Well, I was laughing, but the way that you explain that, it really is the Trojan horse. But it's even, in a sense, worse than a Trojan horse, because what it has in it are horrific paresthetizing ideologies that almost like vampire ideologies. But we see this in the academy. We've already seen it played out. And if all you would need to do is you would need to look at a system where it's played out and look at multiple systems where it's played out, plot the trajectories of those, and then ask yourself, what is different about any other system that could withstand this Trojan horse paresthetizing that none of our secular institutions could withstand?
Yeah, a good example would be the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, which melted down pretty famously a couple of years ago. It's not difficult to track exactly how this worked. What happened was critical race theory and intersectionality were brought in as core tenets in what they called an equity plan for the college.
I'll apologize for the advertising that got into the recording. If I figured out how to block it, then I'll just apologize for the mysterious block at the bottom of the screen. I really don't want to pass on the advertising into my video. I don't have much to comment on in this one beyond that. Some of this I shared just so that you could learn these definitions and these examples that they work with. In the next clip, they give an explanation of how the word equity does not anymore mean what most people think it means. And you'll hear here that one of these times when they kind of get each other excited and or worked up, because that's what happens when you have, I've explained this before, when you're preaching to the choir in the locker room. Sure, there's a camera going, but the three people are in large agreement about the fearfulness of this phenomenon, and so they get each other amped up in ways that I think, for me, does not help them communicate their message. Correct as they might be, as I learn this, in their alarm.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you?
Yes, of course.
So that is one of the words that I think we have to talk about, and it's a key word. When people hear equity, they have to know that it's not what they think it is. It doesn't mean what they think it means, and that's time to start paying attention. When you hear the word equity, boom, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, because if equity meant the same thing as people think, which is equality, there would be synonyms, and you wouldn't have to use the word equity.
Exactly.
Equity is defined to mean adjusting share so that people are made equal. It is equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. It's, jimmying the system so that everything comes out fair on the end, no matter what the inputs were going in, effort, merit, etc., plus the starting place question.
So this is one of the clips that I had a little bit more trouble with assenting to them, I guess. But I include it because I think it's worth noting and knowing about and considering. But to me, there are many times when it seems right and fair to tilt the scales a little. This leveling the playing field that they kind of talk about. And what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking of those videos that we all love to watch of some child with some lack of ability to play a sport like the rest, for whom the field of play gets tilted, and they make a touchdown or a home run or whatever it is that helps them feel victorious. And everyone celebrates. Everyone enjoys that. Often both sides will be part of this happening. And it's moving. It does something to us when we see it happen. So that's just one example that comes to mind of when some leveling is okay. So it strikes me that they're talking about something extreme. What we celebrate in that kind of story that I just pointed to is that for one moment, the sport became a place where an infinite game was being played, an eternal game. It became central, and it no longer was a finite game. Here I'm referring back to what Simon Sinek said in my last commentary video. And I just found that idea a very significant one. And so what if? How does infinite and finite play into this particular dynamic? In the next clip, they talk about how when some of these ideas take over, they erode some of the core tenets that have been foundational in Western society. I'll let that run.
It's not really asking people to adopt what they think it's asking them to adopt. It's asking them to take in an entirely different worldview that's, in many senses, not only incompatible, but will eat away the values that they have.
Yeah, one of the core tenets is the work of anti-racism is never done. Never. You can't do it right. You can't finish. And then...
Never accomplished.
Yeah, it can never be accomplished. And then they safeguard this off of these very, again, superficially interesting, at least, ideas, like white fragility. White fragility is an idea that is from a scholar named Robin DiAngelo. She wrote the idea down in 2011. She's got a big book, 2018, about it. Big tour all around it. She speaks all over the place. I know she speaks
book, by the way.
Yeah, to a lot of churches she's spoken to. The idea of white fragility is that if you in any way disagree with any of this critical race theory, if you in any way disagree, it's because you don't have the racial stamina to do the anti-racism work, to constantly re-examine yourself and find your hidden racism. that you automatically participate in. If you ignore it, that's a manifestation of your white fragility. That's proving that you are complicit in the system and that you're unwilling to do the work. If you just go away from it, that's because you're too fragile to get engaged. You're unwilling to engage. And I bring up white fragility, but that's the tip of an iceberg that has characterized critical race and social justice scholarship for the past decade at least. And really going back, I would say, pushing back at least to 2004 or 5, the scholarship has all been converging upon this idea that any kind of disagreement whatsoever is either a character failure, like literally participation in white supremacy grade character failure, a failure to be willing to engage because you can't handle it, or you're fragile, your privilege has made you too weak, you've become too comfortable in your privilege to want to do the work, to believe the system, or that you are somehow actively complicit in it.
So this is a hard one. I'm a person who does not like to be in impossible situations where there seems to be no way out. Those situations where no matter what you do or don't do, or say or don't say, it's going to be taken as evidence that you are part of the problem, if not the problem itself. That's a terrible, terrible bind. And that kind of situation is actually often a focal situation in, like, movies with an evil character who puts people in that situation. So part of why I'm making my commentary videos is because I'm finding already now 6 in that I'm learning so much by studying this and then by giving my own commentary. And I need to learn how this works. And I feel in a strong need actually to be prepared if this comes to pass in my life and to be equipped to deal with it. I don't have those answers at this point, but I do have some good questions now, thinking about it ahead. I'll move to the next clip.
Right. To the point where today there are many articles and books and so forth that are within the evangelical community, this isn't on the fringe, that are asking the question, can a white person be saved? Can a white person legitimately be considered a Christian?
Well, that's not surprising at all, because the concept of privilege within critical race theory, or intersectionality more generally, I should say, operates in exact parallel to total depravity. It is a form of power that corrupts you to want to maintain and preserve it, and that conditions you, white fragility, to not be willing to engage with the hard spiritual work of undoing that.
Right. So then the introduction of something that would be like a woke church, then if, because you're coming from a perspective that's outside of the church, and you hear someone's now with these concepts and ideologies are legitimizing the idea of a woke church.
I mean, think about it for just like this, though. You have the idea, let's say that you adopt critical race tools, and you adopt the idea that somehow white privilege is a sin, complicity with the problem, and remember, everyone is complicit and whites benefit most. So that's a sin. It's a cardinal sin that's somehow attached to being white, whatever that actually means, given that people are all kinds of ethnicities and classified as white. But then the last tenet was, it's never done. It's never accomplished. So that's your sin. There's no way to work your sin off. There's no...
This clip puts before us the great question, what does salvation look like in a woke culture? How is it achieved? How is heaven, or its equivalent of heaven, achieved in a woke culture, a woke church? We do need to think about this. I find it so interesting, again, that as with Douglas Murray, we are hearing warnings for the Christ kingdom-centered church from people outside of it. if the original sin is being born into privilege, is having power that others find oppressive to them, and the systemic racism culture, and the systemic racism culture is not able to be fixed, like it's never able to become pure, and I am unable to repair the damage in my own privilege that my own privilege is believed to be doing, then how can the situation be redeemed? I feel anxiety around answering that question, and yet I'm glad that to find a way of naming it. So they explore somewhat further in the next video clip. In some of it, they talk about this as if it is an agenda. And so I'm going to put a little bit of editorial comment in here around that. In the same way, they do this in the same way as some Christians will talk about a gay agenda or a progressive agenda or a conservative agenda. And I don't subscribe to that kind of way of describing it, that kind of thing. As if there are, because it creates this image of that there are these 6 people who get together and strategize some of these cultural changes, and they pull strings to make them happen. It's so conspiratorial and conspiracy theory-like. And I really sociologically don't think it happens that way. What I think happens is that these cultural changes begin to come about as a result of people believing beliefs or believing in beliefs like wokeness or political correctness or whatever, and critical race theory. They believe in those beliefs, and as they move into living out those beliefs about beliefs, things begin to shift on their own without strategy. So there's no strategy to it. It's just a cultural movement. We want very much for someone to find those 6 people and hold them accountable. But I don't think it works that way. I think it is more of an osmosis kind of a process, more of a water soaking into a sponge process. And the water just comes out of the water table. It's not injected by anyone. So this next clip reveals some of the host's own views, and he comes across as rather conservative, at least from within my Christian context. This reference of going back to the 50s, and if we are to go back to that, and then he negatively contrasts trying to do things to have Christianity be more relevant in society, which I think is an important thing to consider, and he kind of dismisses that. But it also shows how he sometimes talks and the guests are not tracking with him. There are a couple times in the larger video where he'll go on a little theological or doctrinal journey, and they politely listen, although very often they'll interrupt him and take over.
Understand that this is happening, so for us to go from what would be a 1950s model of strategic church growth, we need to adopt really a 21st century looking at the realities of things. And if we want to actually exist as a faith within this whole societal construct, we have to move along with that change.
Have fun with that.
Right.
Just wait. Wait. You don't buy in correctly to intersectionality, which you can't possibly do if you're white in particular, but really pretty much anybody, because privilege is relative and somebody's always less privileged than you are and therefore can call you on it. Well, you're not a real Christian then. Good luck with that. Oh, what we need is at our conferences and our churches and our administrative or hierarchical structures of how things are governed. We need representation that's more diverse and inclusive. We need to make sure our churches are more inclusive. We need to promote equity in terms of how pastors, theologians, and so on are paid. So that's the big 3, right? It's kind of like the holy trinity of this thing is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Some people have termed it diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Which might spell die. Usually they don't. They usually call it EDI.
I shouldn't laugh at that. I mean, that's That's really a serious issue.
But these words, again, are Trojan horses themselves. They sound nice, but what do they mean? Okay, we're gonna encourage diversity. What does diversity mean? Why do we need diversity? Do it mean that we need to bring in, people who've studied this this interpretation of the Bible and this one, and get them to debate and try to clarify our understanding for our? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that black people have a fundamentally different view of the world, so you just need a black person.
And all black people think the same, apparently.
Well, they have the same experiences, is the idea. And that experience informs their thing. So you're going to have to start having, say, you're going to have a certain number of women. You're going to have a certain number of black people. You're going to have a certain number of Hispanics. Okay, how? Well, equity would say that it's going to have to, most of the theories of equity say you're going to have to achieve parity.
Right.
How do you achieve parity? Well, actually, parity is not good enough, because if you look historically, they've been excluded. So we're going to boost up a little bit from parity.
Equity.
That's equity. That's equity in application. That's not equality. That's equity. And then you're going to have all of these things like, oh, look, your church, through whatever circumstances, maybe your church, and it has very few people of whatever identity category that applied for such a thing, right? There just aren't applicants for whatever reason, for whatever position. So we're looking at administrative positions and all of this, or to rise up through the ranks. There's just not that many.
Well, and actually, Matt Chandler, who is the pastor of, I believe it's called Village Church in Texas, which is a large multi-campus, and I believe they might be trimming down on some of those campuses, but Matt was traditionally understood as a Reformed Calvinistic preacher. But what he has famously said is, look, if my leadership team comes to me and we're looking for a new leadership position at one of our churches, and they said, look, we have an Anglo 8 and an African American 7. I'm going to take the African American 7.
Right.
Over the purposes of understanding equity.
Exactly.
Correct.
And then what's going to happen is if, let's say that you hire every African American applicant that applied, everyone, to achieve equity as best you could, and you came out with like 6%, and then parity would have had to be 11% or 12% or whatever it is, and then beyond that, to make up for historical injustices, you really need to be hitting a 20% benchmark. The reason you have 6% is because you have a racist church. So guess what you're going to talk about all the time? How are we secretly racist? How are we doing racist things? You aren't going to be able to get away from these conversations. That's the only thing that's really going to be allowed to be talked about. You're going to go talk about a Bible study. You're going to pull up a verse. Now you have to talk about it in terms of how that Bible verse
it governs everything.
Comes up. How is racism involved in that? What does it say about racism? How is it racist itself? All they talk about. And if you don't talk about it, you're fragile, because you're refusing to engage. You're not doing your anti-racism work because you don't have racial stamina, and you are probably doing so because you are part of that imminent
complicit
of racism that lays underneath everything. That's all you're allowed to talk about. That's the critical part. You keep looking and looking and looking and looking until you find examples of the imminence that you know is already there. But what do we call it? Hold up. What do you call it when you look for evidence of the thing that you claim is there, and then when you find the evidence, you say, okay, so we know everything's racist. How do we know? Boom, something racist happened. See, that's a proof that everything's racist. That's called circular reasoning. You started with the thing you want. That's what you're basing it on. And the conversations will continue, and what happens is, so the goal is to attract people to be with the 21st century. That's what the young people want. Oh my God, here's what's going to happen. You have your congregation. It's going to be made up of X percent. They're going to be interested in this stuff. It's going to be made up of Y percent. They hate this stuff. It's going to be made up of people kind of close to each of those. Then it's going to be made up of a wide majority of people who are there to go to church. They don't want their church to be about racial politics. They don't want to think about this all the time. They don't want to squabble. They don't want to be accused of racism all the time. They don't want to be accused of subscribing to some weird notion of sexuality or something like this that's horrible, makes them a horrible person. They don't want to be told their gender doesn't exist and that they have to accept this. They don't want to hear any of it. And so they're going to hear it and they're going to be like, I'm just not going to go to this church. Not because the pastor's got any particular problem. It's because the community becomes obsessed with it. Right. And so the middle starts to fall out. Churches have got to pay for themselves. I hate to make it about money. All organizations have to fund themselves. And when the middle drops out, you're not financially solvent anymore.
Unless you have something that's filling the middle.
Unless you have something that's pouring money in to keep it going, right?
Correct. Right. And I think the scary part about this is that you just identified every problem. We were talking about the epistemological problem. We're talking about the idea of collectivism. When I had stated before that, that their assumption, or actually their assertion, is that all black people think the same, all Latino people think the same, all Asian women think the same. Therefore, we must have one to have that particular epistemic island that exists, so we understand that oppressed community.
Exactly, and it's to understand that oppression specifically, not to understand, like, it's not like they know physics better than somebody else. It's to understand oppression, so they can talk about oppression, so everybody can talk about oppression.
In this case, the gospel.
And let me tell you how I know that this is what it does to an organization. Not only have I seen it happen in since we came out with the work that we've done in the past couple of years looking into this, countless people have emailed us and told us, this is happening in my hiking club. They describe the dynamic. It's the same thing I just described. This is happening in my knitting community. They describe the dynamic. This is what just happened. This is happening in my legal professional association. This is exactly. But
nursing.
This is where I saw this. We are atheists. We were active in the atheism, the new atheism movement. Sorry guys. It happened there.
Right.
And that's where you start talking about that huge middle who doesn't want to go to conferences, the financial thing that keeps it going, the energy that keeps it going, that keeps it building, keeps it interesting and vibrant. They don't want to go to conferences anymore where it's just going to be people squabbling over who's going to be, who about some racial thing, or get accused of something.
Gender parity at conferences. Or
what's going to happen is there will be factions that build up that are into this, and they're going to demand that at conferences, etc., their speakers get priority. And if you don't, you're sexist, you're racist, you're anti-this, you're anti-that. And so what's going to happen is, at first, people are going to bend over and accept this. Oh, we don't want to be that. We're trying to do the right thing. So let's put some on there.
And that's your first mistake.
And then what happens is they're on there. Well, people didn't necessarily come to see those, but maybe it's fine at first. But then they're going to take whoever your big names are, whoever your big draw is, whoever your biggest people are. I don't know who they are. Whoever they are. I can bet you within a year or two they're going to have some secret racism discovered in them, and they're problematic, and we're not going to go to your conference if that racist is allowed to speak. So now your big draw guy, he's out. He's not allowed up there anymore, and they're going to replace him with 5 people that nobody really wants to listen to that's peddling their message.
Sorry to subject you to a longer clip. That was the longest one that I'm going to be using, over 8 minutes, I believe. But I looked at it a couple times and I thought, no, it contains helpful information to digest. It's good food for thought and consideration. And I included it because I've seen some aspects of this playing out in real life. This next clip I found to be chilling.
Yeah, what are you going to do if somebody comes and says, well, we're going to make this aspect of our church experience be about anti-racism work, and then...
Oh, that's happening.
Oh, no. But what are you going to do? Let's say you're the guy in the pew, and the pastor says, we're going to make this portion of the sermon or the whole church experience be about anti-racism work, and you say, Pastor, I don't know about that. And then that is taken as proof that you need it.
Right.
You saying, wait a minute, equals proof you need more of it. How do you fight back against that? And so what happened, I drew to the analogy to the Evergreen State College before, what happened there is you had an entire faculty and many in the student body, and certainly many in the administration, who had bought into this program and understood these concepts, and they knew that they had no recourse but to go along. They knew, and they didn't. There's some who just cynically, they're like, I know this is wrong, but I'm scared, so I'm not gonna do anything. They're just cowards. There are others who were afraid in the sense, I don't want to be called a racist. I don't want to be branded as a racist. Right. There are others who are, I don't want to be a racist. Maybe it's right. Maybe there's something to it that I don't get, and I don't want to be that. Right. But what you are completely disarmed if what gets taken off the table is your ability to raise your hand and say, wait a minute.
Like I said, chilling. I've been in a few situations similar to that, where you just don't know what to say. And you have a pretty good idea of what's going to be considered inappropriate or off limits, and you don't know how to raise good questions. in the context that will help people look at it a little more broadly. Fortunately or unfortunately for myself and for others, I seem to have this gift of blundering into naming elephants that people are trying to hide, or pointing out naked emperors. And I get everybody upset because I do that in both a progressive direction and in a conservative direction. So I'm an equal opportunity offender in that way. Although most of my life I've used that kind of observation and commenting to challenge, within my context, more traditionalistic thinking. So this is all troubling. Some aspects of this are very troubling. In parts that I did not include, it is pointed out that those who are swept up in this alternate ideology of what I'm calling Christian tenets gone rogue believe they are doing the Lord's work in purging society of racism. And they will sound Christian because the language they use is similar to the language of biblical justice and those kinds of things. But there's something else going on, again, that I'm trying to identify. So as this particular kind of narrative gains dominance in the broader culture, and particularly academia, and as this whole video is about, that I'm commenting on as a warning to the church that this may play out there, the institutional church, the chilling part is that voices that attempt to question or disagree over time get culled, get disassociated, become like lepers in the Old Testament, in the Bible, and they are told they may not speak anymore. They don't understand. They're seen as insufficient. And yes, I have heard people argue that that's kind of then a flip completely of racism, where because of a person's skin color and their cultural background, their voice is attempted to be eliminated simply on the basis of their race. I like the provocativeness of it at the very least, and I like the kind of counter-culturalness of it as well. So in some other parts of the video, they show how this plays out in other areas, particularly in academia. But then also these last few clips that I'm going to share, they move into, it's a little bit more fun after this one more scary one, and I'll let the last two just run without introduction as well. But this next one is about how to do your anti-racism work and how it's really impossible, how the whole thing is set up that it's impossible to do.
Everything.
I can give you an example of how deeply impossible it is. We've talked about, oh, you didn't agree, whatever. Let's take another step. You say, okay, I want to do my anti-racism work. How do I do it? And they tell you to go read some stuff. Well, if you didn't agree with every conclusion, you didn't engage properly. You're engaging in what's called privilege-preserving epistemic pushback. That's Allison Bailey. Okay, so let's say you say, well, I want to do my anti-racism work. What do I need to do? And like, well, you need to understand the oppression from the perspective of somebody who experiences it, because it's the only people who know it. So you need to find a person of color to teach you about that. And you say, oh, you're a person of color? Will you teach me about that? No, they can't, because it's epistemic exploitation. Epistemic exploitation. Nora Berenstain, 2016, wrote about epistemic exploitation, which occurs anytime a person with privilege or power asks a marginalized person to explain their lived experience and do that work such that they understand, which improves them and makes them a good dominant person who has done their anti-racism work. So you're exploiting you can only possibly learn about marginalization or oppression by talking to somebody who actually experiences it. There's no other possible way. But to do that is a form of exploiting them, which is racist. You can only learn about racism by talking to somebody who experiences racism, which is everybody who is that has the identity, whether they claim to or not. And then if you ask them to explain it, which is the thing that they demand of you, you're exploiting them, which is racism.
This brought to mind for me a situation in real life for me where I am deliberately getting to know a fellow in our neighborhood who is native born and who comes and collects cans and bottles. And at one point in my life, a couple of years ago, I felt challenged within myself at the fact that he was completely anonymous to me. So I just had this kind of stereotypical view of, and he has admitted to me that he's an alcoholic, so that he can't live with alcohol and he can't live without it, and he can't quit using it either. Where I decided that I needed to get to know him as a person. So I asked him his name. He was astonished, but now we use each other's first names. And once in a while, if I have the time and he has the interest, when he comes by, we'll sit on the front porch, make him a coffee, and we'll have conversation. The last one we had was quite significant. I got to be a bit pastoral with him because his, I think he himself referred to her as his street wife. So a lady that had been his partner for 9 years or so recently died suddenly, as have a couple of his street buddies in some of the opioid crisis stuff. And so really, I facilitated a conversation in which I facilitated grief for him. But the trouble is that for an addict, grieving just becomes a pathway to woe is me, or poor me, pour me a drink. So that's just a challenging conversation to have, but it was heartwarming for me when he said he found me to be an easy person to talk to, and he finds me to be that. So I'm on this journey with him of getting to know him. And at one point I started thinking, it'd be great to have his permission to run a camera while we talk sometime, just so that his story could get told, because it's quite a story. I've had bits and pieces of it, but I could ask him questions that would bring out those various stories. And his stories reveal, like this is to me as well, how stuck he is. I don't know how to get him out of where he is. Until recently, he was living rough, as they call it. So living in the bush, that was his preference. And again, his story explains why. Recently, he got hooked up with some program where he has an apartment. But in his grief right now and his depression, he admitted to me he's not taking good care of that. And so where does that go, right? And so there's this desire to rescue. But of course, that's colonial, isn't it? And there's this empathy, like, oh, you want to help. And numerous times I've told him that my wife and I would be ready to support him and raise more support if needed, if he chose to go in for treatment. And I presume there's plenty of financial help available. He's also a military veteran from the U.S., so, but I absolutely mean it. If you choose to want to quit drinking, we'll support you with that. Absolutely. No questions. So, but now learning some of this other thing and reading on racism and having conversations with people about the challenges of racism, when I had that idea of running a camera, I thought, no, that would be abusing him. And he would not, because there's an imbalance of power, right? He gets, first of all, bottles and cans from us, so that's income to sustain his drinking, and also maybe to buy food. So he wouldn't want to jeopardize that. So I have power over him in that. And then I'm a white person who's been fairly nice to him, and so it became really complicated to try so I never did it. But this is the kind of thing that starts to enter your mind. I think a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have even thought of that. Yeah. And I don't know, there may be things even in how I've just told this that are racist. And I do want to learn how to identify and do away with that in myself, but I feel so stuck with this particular situation. So that was a significant clip. I'm just going to let the last two run, and then a couple of quick closing comments. I think enough has been said in this one for today.
And I want to go back to something he said, because I had been thinking about that. It was in Coet, but when you said it, I was like, wow. I have had in the back of my mind that if this were at the height of the New Atheist movement, and when, you know, we were extremely involved in that, if I wanted a plan, if I were going to design a plan to bring right?
Oh yeah, I know
to
where you're
bring
going.
the whole thing down.
All of Christianity. Let's end Christianity.
All of
How do we do it?
Christendom. Yeah, how would you do it?
Make them woke.
Yep.
It'll eat itself from the inside.
Yep. And then I'd be...
I'm not the old guard atheist I alluded to earlier. People can believe what they want. I'm happy about that. Let them. Then we'll talk. You know, we'll figure this out. We'll figure out what's true together.
But that's not what the goal is.
If I wanted to end the church,
they don't want to know what's true.
But if I were the old school angry atheist, it's like, let's just throw rocks at the cathedral till it falls down. And start making woke pastors and sending them in, because they're going to tear everything apart.
Yeah.
Because everything about identity,
it's inevitable,
and that's all they talk about. Justice, justice, justice. What does justice mean? Justice means something to do with equity, inclusion, blah blah blah. What does inclusion mean? Inclusion means that nobody ever gets offended. How are you going to do that?
Yep.
Censor speech, so you don't talk about things. You don't. Being good, being white, something complicity.
I'm telling you right now, we're giving you the
associate.
trajectory of your own demise. We're just telling you, this is what's going to happen.
As an if I was still the angry atheist that I was at one point in my life, that I think was a fool, this is the plan that I would have hatched. Peter and I would have been like, we know what to do. No.
I liked the clip in which Peter Boghossian gets a bit emotional, so I included that one. There were actually 3 in a row there, if you caught that, and how he has like a genuine concern for the church, that this might destroy the church as an institution as well. It's significant that when they say that this creates a toxic, caustic silence of a fear of transgressing, and how topics become off limits. And then I included the last 2 clips of them just having some fun imagining that they would have come up with this as a strategy when they were angry new atheists. That was just kind of a fun way to end it all. So here you have it. Lots to think about, and a few of my thoughts as well. As I say, I've just begun kind of chewing on this. I hope it's been helpful for you. Again, I congratulate you for making it this far. This is probably going to be the longest one I've made so far. And catch you next time.